In May of 1939, with Europe standing on the edge of war, Heinrich Himmler approved the creation of a concentration camp built exclusively for women. Ravensbrück, situated roughly 90 kilometers north of Berlin near the village of Fürstenberg, would grow into the largest Nazi camp for female prisoners. More than 130,000 women from across occupied Europe passed through its gates, enduring systematic dehumanization, merciless forced labor, medical experimentation, and mass murder. Unlike the better-known extermination camps, Ravensbrück functioned with a distinct and deliberate cruelty. It was not meant for immediate death, but for the gradual destruction of women through work, terror, and experiments. From the moment they arrived, women were rendered nameless, their identities stripped away. The journey to Ravensbrück began in freight trains operated by the Reichsbahn, packed so tightly that women were forced to stand for days without food, water, or sanitation. When the trains finally halted at Fürstenberg station, SS guards accompanied by dogs drove the prisoners onto trucks for the final stretch to the camp. Polish political prisoner Wanda Poltawska, arrested in 1941, later described how the shouting guards and barking dogs created a carefully engineered chaos meant to confuse and terrify. At the camp's main gate, everything that had defined these women beyond the barbed wire was taken from them. Personal possessions were seized and meticulously recorded, though the prisoners would never reclaim them. Next came the shaving of heads, carried out by fellow prisoners under SS oversight. Hair, often the final symbol of individuality, fell into piles as guards observed with indifference or mockery. French resistance fighter Germain Tillon, who survived and later became a respected ethnologist, wrote that the shaving had nothing to do with hygiene, it was an act of humiliation, meant to turn women into indistinguishable figures. The process continued in the showers, where prisoners were blasted with cold water and soaked in harsh disinfectant chemicals. Female SS guards supervised these procedures with intentional brutality. Dorothea Binz, among the most infamous guards at Ravensbrück, was reported to beat women during this stage for even the smallest perceived offense. Afterward, each prisoner was issued a striped camp uniform marked with a colored triangle identifying her category: red for political prisoners, green for criminals, purple for Jehovah's Witnesses, black for those labeled as asocial, and yellow for Jews. Yet the final removal of identity came with the number. Every woman received a registration number that replaced her name in all official records. Sewn onto clothing and sometimes tattooed onto the skin, the number became her sole identity. Geneviève de Gaulle, niece of Charles de Gaulle and arrested for her resistance work, was assigned prisoner number 271372. From that moment forward, she was no longer a person with a past, family, or future, only a unit of labor to be consumed until death. Labor was the weapon. At 4:30 each morning, the piercing bell of roll call shattered any brief rest the prisoners had known. Women assembled in the central square regardless of weather. In northern Germany, winter temperatures frequently plunged well below freezing, yet prisoners stood for hours in thin striped uniforms as SS guards counted and counted again. Roll calls themselves became tools of torture. If a number failed to match, if someone had died overnight or was missing, the entire camp remained frozen in place until the discrepancy was resolved. Some roll calls dragged on for 4, 5, even 6 hours. Only after roll call were work assignments given, and every task was designed to break the body. Inside Ravensbrück, Siemens constructed a factory where women assembled electrical components for the Nazi war effort. The work demanded speed and precision, yet prisoners labored on starvation rations in unheated halls. Those unable to meet quotas were beaten or transferred to even harsher labor details. The textile workshops, where confiscated SS uniforms were repaired and military clothing produced, were no less deadly. 12-hour shifts left women with bleeding fingers, needle wounds, and frostbite. The camp administration drove production relentlessly forward. Survival was irrelevant. Output was everything. And among all assignments, the most feared was the sand detail. Their main targets were young Polish women, political detainees arrested for acts of resistance. These women came to be known as the rabbits, a name they chose themselves in bitter defiance, reflecting how they were treated as test subjects rather than human beings. The experiments were designed to recreate battlefield injuries and evaluate medical treatments. SS physicians Karl Gebhardt and Fritz Fischer intentionally wounded the women's legs. They cut into flesh, inserted foreign materials like wooden splinters, shards of glass, and infectious bacteria, and shattered or removed bone. Officially, the purpose was to observe infections and trial sulfonamide drugs. In truth, this was torture masked as scientific research. The surgeries were carried out without adequate anesthesia, and aftercare was intentionally insufficient. Vladislava Karaluska, one of the rabbits, later testified that she endured multiple operations in which doctors sliced into her leg, introduced bacteria, and then forced her to walk on the injured limb. The agony was unbearable, and the wounds turned gangrenous. Many women were left permanently disabled, legs shortened, muscles destroyed, pain that followed them for the rest of their lives. Every principle of medical ethics was violated, yet the experiments continued for more than 2 years. In total, 86 Polish women were subjected to these procedures, dying either on the operating tables or from the infections that followed. Those who survived did so through remarkable resilience and the solidarity of fellow prisoners, who shared food, changed bandages, and offered comfort amid relentless brutality. In early 1945, when rumors spread that the SS intended to execute the remaining rabbits to erase all witnesses, the women carried out a desperate act of resistance. Some hid in other barracks, protected by prisoners of different nationalities who risked their own lives. Others, too weak to flee, were concealed by camp doctors who falsified medical records. This collective defiance saved lives and ensured that accounts of these crimes would later reach post-war tribunals. Hidden behind a wooden fence near the camp crematorium lay the execution site, deliberately concealed from the main camp. In this room built for secrecy, thousands of women were murdered by gunshot, lethal injection, or hanging. The SS referred to this as special treatment, a bureaucratic phrase that concealed mass killing. Executions at Ravensbrück intensified sharply in late 1944 and early 1945 as Nazi defeat became inevitable. Commandant Fritz Suren, determined to reduce the number of potential witnesses, ordered systematic killings. Women were summoned from their barracks with promises of medical checks or work transfers. Instead, they were led to the execution area, forced to undress, and killed with a shot to the back of the neck. Their bodies were immediately taken to the crematorium, burned, and their ashes dumped into the nearby lake. In January 1945, a gas chamber began operating at Ravensbrück, hastily constructed as the SS sought quicker methods of murder. Unlike Auschwitz's industrial facilities, this was a converted warehouse where groups of around 150 women at a time were killed using Zyklon B. An estimated 5,000 to 6,000 women were murdered there in the camp's final months. Among those executed were French resistance members, Polish underground fighters, and Soviet prisoners of war. Violette Szabo, a British Special Operations agent, was shot at Ravensbrück in February 1945. Olga Benario, a German communist who had fought in Brazil, was murdered there in 1942. These women, and thousands like them, embodied a resistance the Nazis never fully destroyed. Even as executions continued, acts of defiance endured. When French resistance fighter Marie-Claude Vaillant-Couturier saw fellow prisoners led to their deaths, she organized secret gatherings where women quietly sang banned national anthems and recited poetry. These brief moments of humanity preserved dignity amid systematic annihilation. In April 1945, as Soviet forces advanced, the SS abandoned Ravensbrück. Prisoners too weak to march were left behind, while thousands more were driven on death marches to other camps. When the Red Army liberated Ravensbrück on April 30, 1945, they found roughly 3,000 survivors, many barely alive. The full number of victims remains uncertain. Official estimates suggest that of the 130,000 women imprisoned there, between 30,000 and 50,000 died from executions, medical experiments, disease, starvation, and forced labor. Each statistic represents a stolen name, an erased identity, a life deliberately destroyed. Ravensbrück was built to break women through calculated cruelty, yet it also became a place of extraordinary courage. In the testimonies of survivors lies proof that totalitarian systems can never completely extinguish humanity's capacity for resistance, solidarity, and truth. As we confront the machinery of such deliberate evil, how do we ensure that the voices of witnesses retain their power against denial and forgetting? Comment below. Today, the ruins of Ravensbrück stand as a memorial. But the echoes of those who suffered there demand more than remembrance. They demand that we never turn away from the truth of what humanity is capable of doing to itself.